Boldy James is the greatest rapper most people have never heard of. His music is dark and beautiful, with vivid writing and storytelling and cinematic immersive production. He's dropped 11 full albums in the past 3 years alone, and each of them are uniquely different from the last, and they're all true pieces of art in their own way. Some of his records are intense and experimental, and some of them are just menacingly wild rap albums the whole way through. So why does Boldy James have little to no following on social media? Why do the majority of his songs have less than 500,000 streams on Spotify? Why isn't he recognized as the creative genius that he really is? But even more importantly, is Boldy James' lack of commercial success maybe the exact reason why he stands as one of the most creative, most musically diverse, most interesting artists working today? I'm Philip, you're watching Volksgeist, and this is the story of Boldy James. Boldy James is an older guy. He's been making music for a long time. He was born in 1982, but when his police officer father was wounded in the line of duty, they moved back to the east side of Detroit, which, if you don't know, looks like this all the way through. Detroit is a dying, shrinking city. It's lost over 70% of its peak population, meaning that most of the city is literally empty. Burned down foundations, empty lots, vast expanses of nothing, abandoned homes that are starting to collapse in on themselves, dead, quiet streets that feel like they should be full of life, because once upon a time, not so long ago, they were. The strangest part of it all is that some people still live there in the silent, decaying remains of what was once the fourth biggest American city. Boldy James is one of those people. He's a poet shaped by the eerie, heavy silence of a cloudy, post-apocalyptic wasteland with more ghosts than people. His music is a different kind of beautiful. It's the soundtrack to a life that's been lived under dark gray skies, vast expanses of empty, cracking concrete, and the skeletons of homes that are long gone and forgotten. It's not easy to make it out of a place like Detroit, and that's been true for Boldy James throughout his career as well. Detroit itself is a central character in his work, with all the different ways that the dark and dying city influenced who he is today. Overall, though, there isn't much information about Boldy James on the internet. In 2017, Boldy James spent at least half a year in a maximum security prison, and if that wasn't bad enough, this was after he already got his first shot at fame and success in the music industry. This was at the age of 35 years old, with kids to feed and family to take care of. In a lot of ways, he was fucked. A few years earlier, Boldy actually had some buzz. He was the first artist to sign to Mass Appeal, the label founded by Nas that has also worked with De La Soul, DJ Shadow, Dave East, Run the Jewels, and a lot more cult classic underground artists. Boldy James signed to Mass Appeal after releasing his debut record, My First Chemistry Set, with The Alchemist, which, I'll be honest, I had never listened to until writing this video. It's not an album that did big numbers or anything, but it's pretty good anyway. It was produced by The Alchemist, and it has features from Vince Staples, a young Earl Sweatshirt, Action Bronson,
I'm a lunatic. I got 5 on and once the doobie lit. We was locking my room door, stuffing them Uzi clips, running with.
He had a few more minor mixtapes, The Art of Rock Climbing, House of Blues. They're pretty much true underground projects, not like online underground, not SoundCloud or TikTok underground, but like literally almost no one outside of Detroit has ever even heard these mixtapes. If you look at House of Blues, the songs average 10,000 streams on Spotify. The cover art is just ridiculous, and I think the word underrated would be an understatement to describe the impact that Boldy had at this time. I mean, these tracks have 2,000 plays on YouTube, 10,000 on Spotify. Listening to House of Blues, it's almost shocking how much it doesn't sound like a Boldy James album the way I'm used to hearing him. Back in 2017, he wasn't making dark, minimalistic, eerie, gritty songs. More than anything, he was just making generic trap. Most of the beats feel like knockoff early Metro Boomin beats.
First I two-step on the blow, then I move it for the low. When I'm in your city limit, tenant in a rent. Took a 3-hour trip, but we got there in 80 minutes. On the freeway, told her hit.
It's not a bad thing at all, definitely not, but there was clearly still a lot of unrealized potential sitting there for the taking. So basically, other than a few kinda good projects that no one ever really listened to, Boldy wasn't bad before he came back in 2020, but there's also nothing about his older music that screams excellent. I like some songs like Now You Know and Hit It, but it's nothing more than casual enjoyment. It's not fascinating, it's not exciting, it's not atmospheric. So it wasn't a huge surprise that the old version of Boldy James never took off. Looking back later, Boldy said, said, "I wasn't as focused on music as much as I thought I was." He said, "Hustling to feed your family is cool, but I was cutting corners with music, and music could have changed my life forever." And then suddenly, he was in prison on 4 felony charges. But it seems like when he got out, he understood he needed to turn things around for good. And that's exactly what he did. The story goes that within 48 hours of getting out of jail on December 12th, 2019, Boldy was already dealing drugs again, but things went south almost immediately. So instead of going back to prison, he got on a plane to California. Within a few days, he was in the studio with The Alchemist, and within a month, they finished The Price of Tea in China. This album changed Boldy James' life and legacy forever. Like I mentioned, before 2020, Boldy James wasn't a nobody, but he wasn't exactly a somebody either. He was a good rapper with some good songs, but until he got out of jail in 2020 and decided to truly turn things around for good, his music was just missing something. And it didn't help that he just kept getting in trouble with the law. It wouldn't be until he left Detroit and truly focused that he could really get started. The Price of Tea in China probably wouldn't have succeeded if it hadn't been attached to The Alchemist, because after all, The Alchemist does have a dedicated cult fan base. He's one of the most well-respected hip-hop producers around and has been for many years, but Boldy at the time, no one was really holding their breath for his next project. But The Price of Tea in China was so good that it brought Boldy back into the conversation. Not literally back into the conversation, but into the conversation for the first time in a career that he had already been working on since 2009. And it makes sense. Tea in China is a major improvement on anything Boldy ever made before. It's unrecognizable. This wasn't just an artistic renaissance. This was an artistic rebirth. It's unrecognizable. Boldy sounds nothing like his former self. He's calmer, more composed, a new man with the same old problems. And the beats feel industrial, dark, dreamy, and grainy. The samples place Boldy into the fiendishly violent underbelly of Detroit's infinite decay, and his lyrics nonchalantly address the darkest, most bleak aspects of the drug-dealing life. In his world, death is a regular part of his existence. The nights are long, the despair is endless, the skies are dark and cold. Even the idea of flexing, getting rich, having money, it doesn't mean anything in the world of Boldy James. Boldy is this way because he is. He doesn't seem to get any enjoyment out of the violence in his lyrics. There's a profound cloud of darkness that hangs over Tea in China. Sirens in the distance, old news clips. The only thing that interrupts his nonchalant, sluggish rapping is eerie synths from The Alchemist. It's a threatening album that doesn't feel threatening until you realize what you're hearing might sound relaxed and easygoing, but underneath, it's the dark, depraved confessions of a cold-hearted monster. Phone Bill is an atmospheric song with a ghostly, wavering melody that gives the track a devilish sound. Giant Slide has this loping, off-kilter whistling melody, and Surf and Turf is an evil, airy-sounding masterpiece of a beat. Grey October is a dark, melancholic, jazzy opus about life and death. Again, Boldy depicts the dangerous, evil drug dealing of his past, not from the perspective of someone who wanted to be there, but as someone for whom the evil actions was just what he was born into. He raps, "All this murder on my mind, it's hard to face it sober," as the mellow guitar chords personify a dark and stormy afternoon in the smoldering, ruined streets of Detroit. The sample asks, "Do you believe in God?" like a question from Boldy to himself. He doesn't even feel human. He raps, "I'm only human, baby, or am I?" And he ad-libs creatures into the silence, a motif that would only grow until we start to believe it later on.
Trying to tell you, baby, this shit hurt. I'm only human, baby. Or am I? Creatures, lost.
The Price of Tea in China, it's more than just a rap album about crime. It kind of goes above its own subject matter and becomes a painting of Detroit. The expressive poeticism, the record fuzz in the mixing, the dreamlike ambiance of the instrumentals. One minute, he's a criminal mastermind on Scrape the Bowl. The next minute, he's a ghost floating far above the destruction and rubble of his own city, considering his own capacity for evil on Grey October.
Clay Jones III. Since Auntie Khalid and Uncle Speedy stayed on the fire. Been 6'4", YBS. Bold and cold. I keep it funky with my focus. Hunting with my poach.
Back in 2020, The Price of Tea in China ended up being one of the biggest creative breakthroughs for any rap artist in recent memory. It took Boldy from a decent, pretty obscure Detroit underground artist to one of the biggest underground rappers around. But even more than that, The Price of Tea in China was just the beginning for Boldy James' run of 11 excellent albums that are unlike anything else. I've spent thousands of hours working on Volksgeist videos because I have an obsession with making them perfect. That's also why I've never sold merch until right now. I don't want to put my name on a project unless it's the best thing I've made yet. So I decided to make the highest quality clothing I can so people can support my work and actually get something useful in return. The shirts are made of 100% cotton, they're made in the US, and they have an embroidered silver Volksgeist logo with the word Volks underneath. So if you want to support the hard work and detail that goes into making my videos and get a piece of high quality clothing in return, you can get a t-shirt or a crew neck at volksgeist.store right now. And as always, shipping is free in the US. After the excellent reception to Tea in China, again, this really propelled Boldy to a new level of exposure and fandom that he had never reached before. And he just kept going. 6 months later, he dropped an even more experimental, even more strange, atmospheric album called Manger on McNichols. And Manger is not an easy listen. When you turn on the intro track, you get thrown into this wild, noisy jazz cacophony before the beat immediately switches into a medieval Renaissance symphonic and guitar string ensemble with guttural, moaning background vocals as Boldy raps like a bat out of hell about his darkly criminal past.
Nowadays, there's no place to stand on the corner.
Kind creatures, 100 cc's for the shooters. This is every dope thing stream that's a tutor, therapeutic to the user.
Songs like Mommy Dearest feature demented instrumentals with sawing cello melodies, chilled out xylophones, muted drums, and turbulent, noisy soundscapes.
The song was just dark. My man Sterling Toes, he produced it. And he used to always tell me to be more personal. So the more personal I got, the darker my music got. And then people had to bring me back to the light and start telling me.
The writing on this album is incredible, even down to the title, in which Manger on McNichols paints a picture of how Boldy was raised in the manger of the dark and gritty world in and around McNichols Avenue, a miles-long street that runs through some of the darkest, most dangerous areas in all of Detroit. But of course, I also have to give props to the album's sole producer, Sterling Tolles, who made this project so much more than just a rap album in the best way possible. From the deep, woody flutes to the fuzzy, grainy, rambling drums to the intense, almost primitive background vocals, the album makes Detroit feel like a concrete cocaine jungle with more secrets buried underneath the surface than any real sense of order left around. It reminds me of the stories of ancient Rome and how the historians say that in many ways, Romans didn't realize Rome had fallen until many hundreds of years later. Detroit, in the same way, we can see that the city is dying slowly, because the day when Detroit was at its peak passed long ago, and it's undisputedly slowly crumbling into dust. But that doesn't mean that life doesn't go on in the ruins of a fallen empire. On songs like Requiem and Detroit River Rock, we get the feeling of desolation and lawlessness injected into our ears with chaotic sounds and dark, depraved lyrics.
Hell block, 6 Mile, drugs on 76, kind creatures, yeah. I do dirt with them snakes in the grass.
Again, I just can't possibly emphasize how underrated this record is. Sterling Tolles, as far as I can tell, is a genius producer with some of the best, most interesting, fascinating arrangements and textures and mixing I've ever heard. Not to make a really obvious, generic, basic comparison, but Manger on McNichols sounds like a more abstract version of To Pimp a Butterfly, which is only made more impressive by the fact that it was produced by one guy that hardly anyone outside of Detroit has ever heard of. From drumless jazz beats backed by noodling synths and serene horn arrangements on Requiem to the almost drum and bass sound of BB Butcher, I'm blown away by the synergy and detail that Sterling Toll achieved with Boldy, and I would say that Manger on McNichols is easily one of the 5 best producer-rapper albums I've ever heard. I would literally say, for me personally, this is nearly on the same level as something like Mad Villainy. But when you Google Sterling Tolles, nothing comes up. No one knows this guy. I don't even know if he's made other albums. I have no clue. But this is an absolute masterpiece. And the storytelling on this record is nothing if not tortured. On Mommy Dearest, Boldy talks about what it was like to grow up in a broken family with blunt, direct lyrics unlike anything else. He raps, "I know my mother wished she got an abortion," on top of a beat made from a forlorn cello and sparse drums, and it all comes together to feel like a satanic religious ritual more than any kind of normal hip-hop beat. Even through Boldy James' signature deadpan monotonous delivery, the pain in his voice is overwhelming. It's actually crazy how underrated Manger on McNichols is. I think it's basically on par with some of the best rap albums made in the last 10 years, and from the minute I heard it, it became one of my favorite albums of all time. The synergy between Boldy and Sterling and the way that they came together to paint a jazzy and beautiful yet disturbing dark picture of Detroit is unlike anything else. It's so unique, and you're really missing out if you haven't heard this album. I can't go into detail and describe and explore every single Boldy James album in this video because there are just too many of them. But the short version of the story is that they're all really, really good. But what's crazy about these two masterpiece albums, one of which is one of my favorite records ever, Price of Tea in China and Manger on McNichols, these are only 2 of the 4 albums Boldy dropped in 2020. The fact that he could drop all this music and have each record feel like a unique piece of work with its own sound and themes, it's just crazy. The third project he put out in 2020 was the Versace tape with Griselda Records. It was produced by the one and only, a good friend of mine, Jay Versace. It's a solid album that streamed a lot better than Manger on McNichols, probably mostly because it has a less challenging experimental sound. Not to say it's not as good, because beats like Monte Cristo and New Wave are pretty damn good. I do prefer the chaos and the abstract sound from the previous project over the warmer, smoother sound of the Versace tape, but it is still a really solid project. Songs like Cardinal Sin and Monte Cristo feature vocal manipulation and sample chops. It feels vaguely like a hip-hop vaporwave crossover, while Boldy crafts his typically immersive and cinematic stories about growing up in Detroit.
Let's get it. Before the COVID, I've been on it. Mask and gloves when my man sent it. Transcended, still getting money in the pandemic. Ceramic coating on the palette of porcelain. Box cutters.
Boldy's 4th and final album of 2020, Real Bad Boldy, was produced by a clothing brand. Yes, a literal clothing brand that also makes beats. And the record ranges from having a dark and murky sound like on the intro track and 1,000 Pills.
1's for the money, 2's for the show, 3 for the farm with them blues for the low. 3rd time is a charm, hit them 2 in a row. 1 love to my niggas, chunk of deuce for my bros. 2nd time around, only a few niggas know.
But some of it is also catchy and fun, like on Good Foot and Little Vicious. In 2021, Boldy dropped 2 albums, both with The Alchemist, and it's actually crazy to see just how much The Alchemist enhances Boldy's rapping compared to the Versace tape and Real Bad Boldy. Those projects do have a similar blueprint to his work with The Alchemist, but when he teams up with Al, the ambience is just so much more powerful. Bo Jackson is one of my favorite Boldy albums ever. It features some of Boldy's best lyrics, some amazing features, and some of my all-time favorite beats as well. If I had to criticize Real Bad Boldy and the Versace tape, I would say that at some points in these projects they feel a little bit passive. The atmosphere is still good, the soundscapes are still good, but they're just not as exciting as on Bo Jackson, which I'm still listening to 2 years later. First 48 freestyle, where Boldy raps, "As long as I woke up today, I do not have one complaint," like some stoic villain on top of a strangely serene synth. Photographic Memories with Earl Sweatshirt and Rock Marciano features one of my favorite Earl verses ever on top of a truly menacing, cold instrumental.
Can't get an oven mitt, no, we run this bitch. A glutton for punishment, keep a submachine gun with a 100 clip. Volatile, don't want no problemo with a problem child. Ain't cop that shit from us, can't come around, niggas not allowed, cashing in.
Steel Wool feels like a nightmare. There's this chase sequence unfolding in a never-ending alley littered with needles and trash.
V8 in that straight, 40s on that black. Cherokee, this that gangster slash. Pop mixed with trap, karaoke. Turn a snow globe to a crystal ball, now that dog a team. Type to turn a stone with many floors to a flawless gym. Stack my money.
Third Person is the cloud-like, soft, pillowy instrumental where Boldy again floats through his dark sins. Double Hockey Sticks features horror movie piano arpeggios on top of old dusty drums. It's more than just boom bap. It's not the Griselda sound. There's something abstract and cinematic going on at the same time, even down to the cover art, which The Alchemist made himself.
On the HE double hockey sticks, we keep a streak. When it come to creature biz, I make sure I stay in touch with Poppy Bricks. Bruno my consigliere, from the crab to the road. Used to put that bag on the road, now it's in the air.
Boldy James' storytelling is just wild. The wordplay and the flows riding on top of The Alchemist's strange, creaky sounds. He raps, "Volatile, don't want no problemo with a problem child." There are so many memorable lyrics. Boldy just crafted this intense, stormy world of danger that, again, feels like second nature to him. In all of his music, he doesn't ever imply that his criminal lifestyle is something he enjoys. He makes his lyrics about drug dealing feel like a burden on his soul, but it's not like he regrets it or wishes there were another way, but rather, this is simply his nature. He's a machine that was built for sin. He does it because this is all there is to do. There isn't even a reward with glory and riches. The reward is survival. The reward is Boldy escaping to write another day. The backdrop of these songs is late-night road trips, windy, overcast afternoons in abandoned neighborhoods, men who walk the streets like demons, their souls having escaped into concrete wasteland long, long ago. Creatures who stalk the streets looking for junkies to make a killing on. The hunted have become the hunters. Bo Jackson is just an amazing journey, and you shouldn't miss it. Boldy's next album with the Alchemist came 4 months later, and it's probably the most streamed record of his career so far. There are around 30 million streams on Spotify altogether, and it sounds a lot like Bo Jackson, but with jazzy vibes instead of the dark and ghostly spirit vibes. Bumps and Bruises is like a vaporwave song with a slow, smooth 80s jazz sample. Great Adventures is Boldy's most streamed track ever with a sparkly, easygoing beat, and Moth in the Flame is a frantic, plodding track that might be one of my favorite Alchemist x Boldy tracks yet. As Boldy raps, his flow becomes so urgent that he sounds like a hungry dog chasing prey, while he tells this dark and disturbing story of the hard choices and terrible environments of his past.
In the fire, I was just a moth in the flame, but aspiring to be a boss in the game. Dear diary, I missed the Scarface with the cane. Blame my father, he who put the cross on the chain. Seen a nigga get chalked for $1 bill. From when niggas get taught and learn how to kill.
300 Fences features this theatrical, orchestral sounding instrumental that feels like the backing track to a gothic fantasy movie, while Guilt has a lush, vintage feeling drumless string loop as Boldy raps about his time in prison. And the closing track, Francois, has a jazzy, haunting melody while Boldy raps about his time in the streets.
Bitches, kind creatures, 227. We the new BMF. Popped a perk, pulled up a 60s to relieve the stress. Got fronted a couple balls. Just caught 600 orange. Made it back from Royal House safe. Right back on the Warren, shooting dice.
I think Super Tecmo Bo is easily one of the most beautiful sounding Boldy James productions. I think The Alchemist absolutely killed it on here, and again, it has this kind of different view of normal hip-hop themes. Boldy James' outlook is dark to the point of being scary, and he never really lets up with a joke or a flex. It seems like he's truly only telling these stories because he had to take care of his family. But at the same time, his heart has been darkened to the point of no longer just being a man, but he takes on this beastly aura. He just keeps going because that's all he knows. 2022 had some of my favorite Boldy albums yet. Killing Nothing and Fair Exchange No Robbery have some of the best instrumentals we've heard Boldy rap on, with some of the most memorable lyrics too. Killing Nothing is another album made with the clothing brand Real Bad Man, and I'd say it's definitely one of my favorite Boldy projects. I don't think I've talked about this enough yet, but Boldy's beat choices and the way that he raps on so many different styles of music makes him not just a great writer, but actually one of the most talented rappers alive today. Killing Nothing features a lot of groovy, noir-feeling folk guitar-based beats like Sig Sawyer, Cash Transactions, All the Way Out.
I might tear up if I give you the clear cut. All I've been through and all that they can tell me do is cheer up. I heard bro name popped up in some paperwork. He got a lot of smut on his rep, he gotta clear up. Ain't trying to hear much like I got.
Boldy has memorable lines through the whole project. He'll rap, "I'll never love this rap shit more than this trap shit," or on Ain't No Bon Jovi, he raps, "In Detroit, all we do is sell birds and drop bodies, got fire hobbies, love to read, love to recycle, get money, fuck good, and eat, then repeat cycle." And that's one of those rare occasions where he drops a bar that's actually pretty funny and self-aware. Sig Sawyer features one of my favorite Boldy flows ever. He just sounds so smooth, like evil water under a crumbling bridge, on top of this smooth, plucked, folky acoustic guitar loop.
Hey, look at my wrists. Still ain't got time today. Too much designer sweat. Had to run it up underlay. Serving out of that gray Honda. I was selling on Ronda, yeah. Niggas thought that they knew me my whole life. Never knew where my mama.
And then again on 5 Mississippi, a time-stretched guitar and demonic laughter introduced this folky guitar loop while Boldy goes on a nocturnal journey through his darkest days.
Where we at? Jackson, LAX, Block Workers, Skip.
Killing Nothing is a pretty small album compared to something like Bo Jackson or T in China. It doesn't have any big features or any big name producers attached, but it's still one of my favorite Boldy albums. I remember last year, right after this dropped, I went on a road trip to North Carolina, and while we were driving through the Blue Ridge area, a dense cloud formed over the mountain highways, and for that whole trip, this is all I wanted to listen to in the car. Real Bad Man creates these grooves, and Boldy emerges out of them like a monster in the fog. He's ready to shoot you or sell you drugs or tell you a story of how he became the most evil creature in Detroit all at the same time. It's dense, it's hypnotic, and it's a really fresh sound all at once. And then Boldy's next album, Fair Exchange, No Robbery, is another producer collab with Nicholas Craven, an artist from Montreal. And again, it's a step forward for what Boldy can do with a wide range of sounds and styles, only continuing to prove that Boldy just doesn't miss. He's done so many sounds: dark folk music, smooth, warm boom bap, creepy, atmospheric, synthy weirdness. He can do it all. Drumless jazz. Songs like Straight and Tall, Stuck in Traffic, Town and Country, Designer Drugs. It's a really entertaining project full of drumless jazz instrumentals that you can listen to over and over.
To a track from a Tina to a baseball. Now I cut up 288 8-balls. Know some real niggas in the pen, free 8-ball. Blew up in the 10 like MJG and 8-ball. Then see more bricks in China.
While Six Toes has a menacing minor key beat, Scrabble is laid back, funky, and relaxed. And then Boldy's latest 3 albums, yes, again, he's done another 3 albums since then, have all been pretty good. Mr. 1008, Be That As It May, and Indiana Jones. These 3 aren't mind-blowingly experimental, but they're still really good. Mr. 1008 has some great sounds, songs like Disco Fever, Smacked, The Whole Hundro. They're haunting on a whole other level.
Big bucks, no whammies when I shoot my jammy. Right around with that slammy, time to up the ante. Posted up on that concrete, my feet firmly planted. Catch a body, spend the summer in Miami.
And similarly, Be That As It May, it's not a masterpiece of Boldy James' highest standard of quality, but there are some really unique and interesting sounds on here. Travel Lodge has a stormy, intense, orchestral, trappish, boom-bappish beat. It sounds like it could be played during the climax of The Shining while Jack Nicholson chases his wife around with an axe.
Yeah, when porcelain, that's all we know is scales and scorpions. Red drink, blue pill, Neo and Morpheus. Used to match the robbers with the Audi.
Or in other words, the average day in the life of Boldy James driving around Detroit, fiendishly serving fiends. Sadly, Indiana Jones is the first Boldy album I haven't loved. It feels rushed and cheap, but in a strange twist of fate, Boldy James was nearly killed in Detroit in a 2-car accident that left him with a broken neck just a few days after this record dropped back in January. But he's not done. After miraculously making a full recovery thanks to many extensive surgeries, Boldy recently revealed that he has an album's worth of unreleased J Dilla beats that he's building a record around, potentially titled Drug Dilla, which should be coming sometime soon. I think Boldy James is such an artistic legend because he's so obscure. His character is so different because we hardly know who he is or what he really is. We don't even know why he does this. His lack of fame or clout, that's what makes the music so much more intense. He doesn't rap for social media attention. He doesn't address themes like luxury and excess and consumerism in his music, hardly at all. He's a creature molded by the darkness and destruction of Detroit, and that's where his spirit still lives to this day. He didn't make it big and abandon his roots. He's still there, literally and in his heart and mind. That's what makes Boldy James' music so pure and fascinating. It seems like his one and only goal as a rapper is to paint the world's most vivid, wide-ranging, intense, and immersive picture of Detroit, and to bring the fruits of his labor back to take care of his family. In the last 3 years, Boldy James has made 11 albums. That's after a decade-plus long career of hardly making music at all. And every single one of those 11 albums presents a unique take on the same idea. Boldy James was put on this earth under a dark and doomed sky, in a city full of violence and death. And on the final track of his 2022 album, Mr. 1008, he reveals the motive behind all of his music. He says, "Amen and I be goddamned. Lord, don't let these streets eat me alive and swallow me. I'm just trying to fulfill the prophecy." He didn't choose this life, it chose him. That's why Boldy James has become one of my favorite rappers ever. The way that he's created this immersive world of Detroit music is just so unique. There truly aren't that many artists who have done something like that with their discography. There's just something about the atmospheres, the soundscapes, the lyrics, the idiosyncratic, deep, layered meaning to his words. He says, the concretures, the darkness. Boldy James' 11 albums since 2020 all offer something unique that comes together to create a beautiful tapestry of strange darkness unlike anything else. He is the concreture, the concrete creature, the concrete convict, the convicted creature, a monster created through the circumstances of his own existence, a man who's really lived a life of gloomy darkness in the gloomiest, darkest city in America. And it took him long enough to get here. After all that time in prison, all those projects that went unnoticed by almost everyone, Boldy finally saw an opportunity for a second chance, and he took it. But if he hadn't been through that darkness, these records wouldn't exist. and Boldy James wouldn't be one of the greatest rappers of all time, but he has, and so he will remain as his rhymes echo through the rubble and the ruins of Detroit forever. As always, I'm Philip, this is Volksgeist, and thank you for watching.